This is Recruiters on the Rise, and I'm Colleen Gallagher. Join me for candid conversations with talent leaders as we explore the work that drives them, the lessons they've learned, and how they're helping people find careers they love. The show is sponsored by Lavalier, an interview intelligence platform built by Textio. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Recruiters on the Rise. I'm so excited to have our guest with us today. I'm lucky to call her a close personal friend. And we've known each other for more years than I will admit on this show. She is one of the best talent leaders that I have met and worked with. She has spent time at a number of the largest companies in the world, starting with Motorola, then Flex, which is the world's second largest contract manufacturer. She's currently the Chief People Officer at LiveRamp. Welcome, Stephanie Boman.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining. All right, let's jump in. We are doing the show mainly focused on recruiting, and obviously you have a pretty broad remit in your current role, but you've worked with a lot of recruiters and talent acquisition leaders, and so I'm curious from your perspective, what is the one thing or one action that sets the best recruiters apart from the rest?
Gosh, I don't know if I could boil it down to just one. I think my answer to this has likely evolved over the past few years. I think earlier in my career, I would have said it was about sourcing and finding people that others couldn't find. But the longer I've sat in this seat, the more I land on kind of a few things that I think are genuinely harder to learn and harder to replicate. I think table stakes, I think it starts with just deep curiosity about the business, not just the role. I think when you sit with a recruiter who says, why does this hire matter for the company's strategy right now? That's a very different conversation than someone who shows up with a job description and a sourcing plan. I think, the curiosity is just like foundational. But I do think that there's probably a few other things that separate like great recruiters. I think equally, just a deep understanding of the overall talent landscape. I think the best recruiters know the market the way, a great salesperson knows their territory. They know where like the talent is concentrating, what's moving people like right now, what competitors are paying. And really, candidates at different levels care about different things. So I don't think these are things that you can just look up the night before a search. I think they're kind of developed over time through relationships and pattern recognition.
Yeah.
The best recruiters really know how to sell the company with authenticity. I think candidates know when they're being sold a line. And I think, nothing damages a recruiter's credibility faster than overselling a role and ultimately having the hire leave, 6 to 9 months later. And then I do think, there's an element of courage. I don't know if it's just being a strong TA recruiter, but I think courage is, just hugely important as an HR professional, just having the ability to, have the straight talk to tell the hiring manager, look, I know you love this candidate, but I'm not sure if they can actually do the job.
Yeah.
And then conversely, the courage to tell a candidate the truth, even when the truth is hard. So I get it. Most recruiters are under tremendous pressure to fill the seat and keep everyone happy. But I do think that the great ones optimize for the right outcome. And then, look, there's certainly an element of technology, right? I think the best recruiters are leaning into tools that add structure and reduce bias, like help us stop hiring the most charming person in the room.
Yeah.
So I think that's where tools like, Lavalier can really help, right? Setting the right foundation from the onset.
I love that. I love the curiosity and courage. I think courage in particular, you're totally right, because what I hear from a lot of recruiters is I know that, I shouldn't say a lot, but certainly people talk about, and I think recruiters, what sticks in their minds a lot is I knew that person wasn't the right person for the role, but I didn't have a way to convince the hiring manager otherwise.
I think a great recruiter really can hold both sides of a conversation with integrity. Like the business needs the honesty about what's realistic, but the candidate also deserves transparency. Where do they stand in the process? What does it actually look like? And, we've all been there in terms of, the experience going into a black hole after an interview.
Given that you have, sort of this unique role and you spend, a decent amount of time with your board, I'm curious, what are the metrics that you are reporting out to the board and how do they tie into the, recruiting work or talent acquisition generally?
Yeah, we used to track things like, time to fill. Obviously that's like one of the easiest ones just to
Yeah.
measure. We don't do that. I think have refocused more on kind of the overall like talent landscape. So when I say talent landscape, it is more around attrition. What does it look like across the different classes of employees, different tenures, different geographies.
Uh-huh.
We do track succession planning. And then, we tend to only go um deep into like talent acquisition metrics when it's like a key hire. So if it's someone obviously at the C level, certainly we report out more frequently around that. But otherwise it's really more localized within our functional QBRs.
I'm curious too, when you think about why time to fill is no longer sort of this indicator for success for talent acquisition, like why is that? We've talked a little bit before about it's not about speed anymore, it's about quality. So I'm just, curious how you're thinking about that.
I think like we got really good, we as in just companies, HR teams, TA teams in terms of optimizing for speed and cost of hiring. I think we've really like overall, there's just been an underinvestment in whether these hires actually work out.
Yeah.
So again, trying to move more towards quality of hire versus time to fill. But quality of hire is super challenging because it can't directly be observed in real time, right? It's inferred from outcomes that emerge months or sometimes even years after someone starts. So I'm not sure if any company has fully cracked the code around quality of hire. But, unlike what we may have thought in the past, it's not just one. I don't believe it's just one single indicator. I have done a little bit of research around this, just out of personal interest and like how can you really secure, right? Like you spend time, you spend resources in identifying, a critical hire. You want that person to be successful, but more and more studies or research are pointing to the fact that the front end planning, so planning around like being more efficient and effective around pre-hiring, structured interviews versus gut feel. So I do think that these outcomes end up feeding into part of the quality of hire formula, if you will. Well, I think it is a combination of indicators, things like predictive results derived from structured interviewing, the actual performance on the job. Obviously, performance will always be an indicator. Time to productivity, retention at certain markers, maybe manager satisfaction. I do think it's a combination of these factors.
Yeah, I mean, I've also done a lot of thinking on this and, you know, transparently, the reason that we have brought our newest product to market is to help solve this. But the more and more I dig in and the more and more I think about it, a lot of the ways that are out there right now, and I even know that there are things really focused on manager surveys. And I have a huge problem with that because there's just there's so much noise in that data. And again, it comes down to there are all these subjective data points that can't be looked at, consistently across the who is providing the input. And I think ultimately what it comes down to is it's less about this equation of a retention metric plus a manager survey plus a performance metric. And it's like, to me, it comes down to two things. Like, did we assess whether or not the candidate has the skills that we outlined, and are the skills that we're hiring for the right ones? I think those are the things that people are actually trying to come up with when they are going after quality of hire. And the problem up until this point is that a lot of that lies in the discussions and conversations that people are having in an interview or before an interview, or, getting the intake aligned with a hiring manager. And we just haven't had visibility into a lot of that for a variety of reasons. Um, and I think we are in a spot now where we do have technology available that can help make that better. So I think I agree with you that I think we're getting to a point where we will have better signal on this that isn't just wrapped around the lens of manager feedback, whether that's in a performance review or a survey, 3, 6, 9 months after they've hired someone.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I do think that there's more and more data that's pointing to kind of setting things up, taking the time to set things up before you get the hire. So this is where I think, this is the space that you guys play in. So that's where I think like Lavalier is tremendously helpful. Managers are always eager to fill the role, but they don't want to take the time to do the proper planning. I do think that, that's a broad generalization. I think that we're getting better. And I think just more discipline across the board. And when I say we, I'm just talking like, I saw it at Flex. I see it at LiveRamp. Again, I do think that managers are starting to see the value in like the front end planning. I also think there's data out there that can't be denied that structured interviews versus gut feel, again, the outcome ends up being better. So when you have well-defined or predefined evaluation criteria in advance, and again, AI, we can leverage AI to continuously correlate pre-hire signals with post-hire outcomes. And learning over time, right? Like which interview questions, assessment scores, like sourcing channels, recruiter behaviors actually help drive higher success rates.
Shifting gears a little, I know you recently made an investment in a new ATS, and I'm curious. Talk to me a little bit about what we've heard in the market and what we've seen in the market over the last few years is at least the perception is that there's been a reduced investment in the talent acquisition function within organizations. We've seen that, there was sort of this ramp in hiring in 2020 through 2022. And then a lot of companies have since then, been laying folks off, unfortunately, or, slowed their hiring. And so I'm curious how you are talking about the investment in talent, even like an ATS or even other talent, general talent management solutions. Like, how do you think about investing in those things right now?
I don't actually see a slowdown in investment on like TA, like ATSs or other supplemental tools. Obviously everyone is cost conscious and everyone wants to streamline. When I came into LiveRamp 4 years ago, we we had a different ATS, and then we ended up, we had the intent to consolidate our HR tech stack. So we did not renew our contract with the ATS that we had at the time. And since then, like I said, we consolidated and we will actually be transitioning to a new ATS later in 2026. So in the fall of 2026. And really the conversation that I had with the CFO was, hey, look, we made this decision to reduce. We thought that we were going to ultimately save costs. We thought that there would be tremendous benefit in terms of integrating. I won't say, who we went to, but just being part of the ecosystem of the ERM, and it hasn't proven. So while yes, there has been a slight cost savings, I don't know if ultimately there is a cost savings because it impacts recruiters, it impacts hiring managers, it impacts the HR business partners from a productivity standpoint. Just the lack of visibility, like there was a need for us to continue to hire. We did, like all companies, we have tried to slow down hiring just because the macroeconomic climate, there's a lot of uncertainty out there. Uncertainty impacts business. But again, we haven't shut off hiring. There is a need for our recruiters to be able to be agile, to have visibility, to move quickly. And the ATS that we're currently on now, it's clunky. It's, simple things are like 15 clicks. Recruiters don't have visibility. Like there is no reason in today's day and age you shouldn't be able to, like, every resume. I mean, again, it's, everything, things that are a strength often, it's a double-edged sword, right? So every job now has hundreds of applicants, right? Probably like AI is playing a part in that, but like there's no reason why a recruiter shouldn't be able to quickly search. And again, the current tool that we have prohibits us from doing that. So, ultimately I had to ensure that I had the budget in my within my cost center. But, we've decided to prioritize being able to source, recruit, and attract candidates.
Yeah, I think that is always a challenge. I can say from my seat sitting in a prior seat as a CFO, it is challenging. I think sometimes the investments in technology that supports the organization tends to feel the fuzziest around ROI.
Oh, yeah.
And at the same time, it's sort of obvious. But as I have moved into, broader roles within an organization, sometimes you just have to understand that that fuzziness can't be as defined as you might want it to be. And, you can't look at a a sales variance and know that it was because you sold fewer things than you thought or the price was lower than you thought. It's just not going to be as transparent in that way. So I do think having a leader like you that has some conviction around it and can articulate the value is incredibly valuable. Because I think tying it back to what you said earlier, time to fill is not really the metric anymore. It was almost, when you focus on doing things quickly, it doesn't always get you the yield that you want, which is why I think, I don't want to imply that people haven't been talking about quality of hire for decades, because we know that they have. But I do think that in terms of what I have heard from other leaders and talent acquisition leaders as well, is that it's sort of a secondary metric right now, because when hiring does get somewhat slower, or when it does get even a little bit tighter than it was the last few years, it's so much more important to get the right person in the seat the first time, because you aren't hiring as fast and you just don't have as much flexibility around that. So that makes a ton of sense. Um, I guess the last question I have in terms of sort of where how you think about the business, but in your role as the chief people officer, especially with what is happening with AI, how do you think about um, skilling your existing employee base, and how are you thinking about doing, are you doing training? How do you focus on making sure that your employees are actually staying up to date and not just focusing on the folks that you're hiring, making sure that they have it?
Yeah, so actually about a year ago, maybe slightly over a year ago, we decided to like really double down our efforts around AI as a company. So I actually lead the AI enablement initiative, like in close partnership with our CIO.
Yeah.
We have deliberately branded it People Plus AI, because AI itself isn't going to transform the org. Our people will.
Yep.
We really wanted to send a strong signal that we're not replacing humans with AI, but really amplifying what our people can do. Our people will still own the judgment, the decisions, and the quality. And we want AI to handle the repetitive, time-intensive tasks so everyone can kind of move upstream and work on higher value add activities. So We kicked off the global upskilling last August with, we launched an AI week. We had like 30 plus sessions. In addition to like a full AI literacy curriculum. And then ultimately we put out a certification. We actually hired, one of the top AI SMEs in the world. She's actually based out of Germany, Barbara Lampel. She's amazing. And we have a certification that our employees are able to take. We did not make it mandatory because we really wanted, employees to lean in. We are now saying our fiscal year just started in April, and we are saying for this next fiscal year, by the end of the year, we are expecting all employees to be certified, at least from an AI literacy standpoint. But we are actually in phase 2 of our AI enablement initiative now, and we're going deeper. So we're entering the AI fluency phase with 3 role-specific upskilling tracks. So AI-powered development, agentic working and advanced prompting, and AI engineering. So really, and I think our CEO has done a really good job of just how he positions it to the organization. And really um, it's an opportunity. We are putting things on like AI week. It costs millions of dollars when you add up all of the sessions. And, we have asked people leaders to prioritize letting their employees participate in AI week. So again, our CEO really I think the meta point that he always tries to make is those that don't embrace this are ultimately going to be left behind. You're going to fall behind. And this is future proofing your career as well.
Yeah.
Similar to many organizations out there, we're full blown AI. Again, I am actually really proud of just our branding. We were people plus AI. We definitely don't want to, there are a lot of organizations saying we're AI first, but again, at the heart of it, I think jobs will be very different. But I don't know. Maybe I'm a late adopter, but I don't know if there are going to be that many jobs that just dramatically go away. I do think that the landscape will shift, but there will still be a need for, human component.
Totally agree. Yeah, I think it's about up-leveling and upskilling, and getting people to a space where they can do more of the thought leadership work, and, um, I agree with you there. I think it's I was talking to somebody yesterday too, and I think the fact that you're doing an actual certification requirement is really good, because I think where a lot of organizations, or some organizations, I should say, are falling short is they're doing some training, but they're not actually assessing whether or not, and we all know that, generally training is somewhat ineffective. You actually need to use it. And so I think it's, important to have that certification piece, not just the fact that you're giving people access to the information about it. All right. Well, shifting gears a little, want to learn a little bit more about you, and sort of what got you to where you are today. So I'll start with, if you were to go back and, it's graduation day from Vandy, what piece of advice would you give yourself?
Gosh, I think so many learnings, right, in 20 plus years of working. But I think, one of the biggest ones is really just your network, right? The people that you come across, you never know when. Really just, particularly as you move up and along in your career,
Yeah.
you will likely get your next role, through your network. So again, just really embrace those chance encounters. Anytime you meet people, you never know, where that's going to lead potentially.
How did you end up in HR? Was it something you knew you wanted to go into, or what led you there?
No, definitely not. So I think like many people of my age or year of graduating college, I think that was definitely the consulting years. So I was definitely planning to go be a consultant and travel all over and be very glamorous. Uh But growing up in Chicago, Motorola was huge, was huge at the time, huge Chicagoland employer. And I ended up randomly getting an HR internship. And every summer, I was able to come home, live at home, see friends from high school, made good money. And I thought, I'm in the HR department. I have no idea what this means. I was actually in the L&D department. They had this very robust, like, next generation or hypo leadership program. So, I created beautiful PowerPoints for them. And,
Yeah.
senior year of college at Vanderbilt, I got a full-time offer to go into consulting. And the head of HR left me a voicemail on my message at my apartment. And he basically said, I heard you got another offer. Do not take that offer without talking to me. And my roommate was like, there's this weird voicemail on the answering machine. Like, it's just strange. But yeah, anyway, he basically said, you're going to go into consulting. And in 5 years, you're going to be so burned out. You're going to be begging me for a job. So anyway, I accepted the job. And the rest has been history. So yeah, I've stayed in HR. I actually, I'm super passionate about HR. I love the function. Um, but yeah, I'm definitely an HR purist. Yeah. So when I see non-HR professionals leading the function, I'm kind of looking at them sideways.
My fun fact is that the first job I had was babysitting at the Motorola Museum because I too grew up outside of Chicago in the town where it was headquartered at the time. And,
The Galvin Center. I love the Motorola Museum.
my good friend's mom was a docent there. And so she and I, her daughter and I, who were best friends, we would go and keep little children occupied.
It's funny. Well, from being from Chicago, if you grew up in the Chicagoland suburbs anywhere at all, and you said you worked at Motorola, you always got the, do you know so-and-so?
Yep. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the conversation around, the quality of hire stuff. I think it's something that's top of mind for any leader of a business today. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
Find me on LinkedIn. I'm SF based, so would love to connect as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for listening. If you learned something today or laughed, tell somebody about this podcast. Thank you again to Stephanie for joining me.
Great. Thank you.
This has been another exciting episode of Recruiters on the Rise. We'll see you all next time. And that wraps up another episode. Thank you for joining. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at recruitersontherise.com. Recruiters on the Rise is sponsored by Lavalier, an interview intelligence platform. Lavalier goes beyond basic note takers to improve your ability to assess candidates with AI-powered interview questions, summaries, and transcription. With Lavalier, you can finally hire with speed and confidence.